feel like I should just project. I'm Diane Brady. I'm Executive Editorial Director at Fortune, and I'm here mainly right now just to introduce Michael Saylor, who many of you know. I did feel like I was standing with Beyonce in the hall there. So, beloved Michael Saylor, who is co-founder, Executive Chairman. I know your badge says MicroStrategy, but it is now Strategy. So we're going to talk about that, but Michael's going to give presentation for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to have a very vigorous conversation. I hope this is a living room, so let's have a group conversation. I'll ask Michael a few questions, and then we want to hear from you. So Michael, take it away.
Thank you, Diane. Can you, okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so I'm going to start by stepping back to the middle of the stage because this is my monitor. I've got about 10 minutes of slides to frame the conversation. The conversation's about money. It's about how to make it. It's about how to keep it. I've said before, you'll spend 100,000 hours of your life figuring out how to make money. It takes about 100 hours to figure out Bitcoin. We don't have 100 hours. We don't even have 1 hour. I'm going to give you the 10 or 15 minute cliff note, then we're going to have half an hour of discussion. And hopefully my goal is to intrigue you enough that you decide to go and spend the next 99 hours on this topic and come to your own conclusions. Let me start with the first observation. Bitcoin is the best idea. It's the best economic strategy you're going to find this decade, maybe the best of the century. There's no second best idea. My first exhibit is this chart of economic returns for the past 4.5 years since COVID. You see if you're invested in bonds, you're losing 5% of your money every year. If you're invested in gold and real estate, you're 6 to 8% ARR. The cost of capital for $100 trillion in the world for all the equity capital markets is the S&P index. It's about 14%. How do you beat that index? The Magnificent Seven. There's 7 companies in the world that have digital monopolies, the greatest companies. They've doubled it. How do you beat Apple or Amazon or Facebook or Google if you're not? If you're not Microsoft, if you're a bakery, if you're an investor, if you're a dentist, how do you beat them? The answer is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is doubling the Magnificent Seven. And I'm going to show you why here today. It's the next wave. We've got the internet wave. We've got AI wave. AI is a problem happening to you. You're going to struggle with how you deal with it. It's not easy to figure out how you're going to make money off it. It's not easy to figure out how it doesn't take your institution apart. I'm giving you the simple, happy solution. Bitcoin is a development happening for you, not to you. It's the fastest growing asset in the world. It's the most interesting financial asset in the world. It's the most broadly held financial asset in the world. Imagine a sports team with 400 million fans, and when they score a goal, everybody gets rich. The other sports teams, when they score a goal and they win the Super Bowl or the World Cup, your season tickets get more expensive. Everywhere in the world I go, I meet Bitcoiners, and their blood sugar is all integrated. They're either having a good day or they're having a not good day because they're all on the same team. It's the most digital thing in the world. It's the most useful thing in the world. You need $1 billion on Saturday afternoon in 10 minutes. This is the thing you can sell, right? This is the thing you can buy. You want to move $10 billion or $1 billion in and out of a country? This is the only way to do it. It's not just the strongest asset for 4 years. It's the strongest asset since it was launched. This is 14 years. It's the #1 asset in 11 of the 14 years. But in essence, 60% is about the lowest ARR you've seen it have. It's not just the best performing asset, it's the best performing uncorrelated asset. The holy grail for every high net worth family or individual in the world is to find an uncorrelated asset that can outperform the S&P index. Bitcoin is that thing. It is the perfect egalitarian alternative investment at every scale, everywhere on earth. And what is it? It's digital capital. Digital capital. You've lived through 30 years of digital transformations. Every successful tech investment is about the digital transformation of music and messages and files and processes and relationships and education and video. That's all information. This is the digital transformation of energy, and the number one application of digital energy is capital. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, this is the money in the world. There's I've got $900 trillion of wealth on this map. If you have capital, it's invested in real estate or equity or bonds or gold or art. But I'm going to show you a different way to think of this map of the world. Half of the stuff people own is for their utility value. You have a jet to fly in, you have a sports team because you want to brag about being the owner. You have a piece of art on the wall, you have a building to be in, you have a company or a holding because you want it for the cash flows. You're holding it for the dividends, for the operating income, for the utility. That's the left side of the chart. The right side of the chart is long-term store of value. A bunch of people have money, they just want to keep it. Where do I park my money such that I don't lose it? That's what we'll call long-term capital. It's economic energy. Well, where do you store it? You store it in real estate, you store it in companies, you buy a house that you don't need, you buy art you don't need. If you've got a bunch of artworks buried in a vault underneath the mountain in Switzerland, that's an example of a long-term capital investment. You obviously didn't buy it for the utility value. What's the problem for the $400 trillion worth of long-term capital? The problem is war, famine, pestilence, tariffs, chaos, entropy, inflation, competition, the future. The fact that time moves forward, the fact that forests burn, the fire in LA, the hurricane on the west coast of Florida, all of these things are destroying your long-term capital. What's the cost? About 3% a year. 3% of $450 trillion. It's more than $10 trillion a year. So the big idea is the 20th century inflationary, entropic, chaotic dynamics working on physical and financial assets cost you $10 trillion a year. Anybody that's ever been invested in anything for 20, 30 years, they've lost money to the things on this chart. Right? If you actually watch the news, watch CNBC, they're obsessing over where's the next tariff coming? Will the war in Ukraine end? What about the price of oil? What's NVIDIA going to do? Oops, I have all my money in NVIDIA and DeepSeek just screwed it up. This is the chaos that undermines capital investment. What is Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin's about stripping the risk away from the capital. Bitcoin is without the financial risk of holding a bond or of a currency derivative. It's without the physical risk of a building, a rusting warehouse in Siberia, a dock, what do you have? A skyscraper in Kiev, something in Nigeria, right? These are all risks. And you know what else it is? It's about stripping away counterparty risk. What are you counterparty to? Well, you've got debt. You're counterparty to a creditor. You're counterparty to a competitor. You're counterparty to a country. You own the naira. You're counterparty to a political system. You got art. You're counterparty to a culture. If the culture fails, the art will lose its value. Maybe you're counterparty to a corporation. So if I want to get rid of all the risk and just keep the investment, how do I do that? Well, the answer is I transfer my monetary investment into pure digital capital. And that's what's happening right now. The reason Bitcoin is going through the roof from $1 billion to $10 billion to $100 billion to $1 trillion to $2 trillion is smart money everywhere in the world is running from risk. They're running from Siberian investments and Chinese investments and African investments and 20th century investments. You could look at it and say, oh, it's speculation, it's random, what happens when it stops going up? That's like asking what happens when the water stops flowing downhill. It's like it's like asking, well, you know, I see a fire. What if the fire goes out? Well, Henry Ford saw the fire and said, I'm going to create an engine, put it in a car, create an industry. The fire's not going out if you understand engineering. Just like the nuclear chain reaction is not going out if you engineer the reactor. And in this particular case, your hydroelectric power plant's going to keep working because gravity's going to keep working. The greatest transformation of the 21st century is the transformation of capital. It's so profound that no one can imagine it's even happening. It's like they don't expect to see it. It's just, it's too elemental for most people to realize it's going on around them. Bitcoin is digital capital. What is digital capital? Well, think of a building, I dematerialize it, I get rid of all the things that actually undermine the value of the building, and I put back all the magical properties, make it invisible, immortal, indestructible, teleportable. It's a better piece of capital. Digital capital is stronger, faster, smarter capital than your warehouse in Africa. It's global capital. I give you $1 billion, I drop you in Africa. Buy anything you want, any diversified portfolio of anything you want. Hold it 30 years. Or I give you the equivalent amount of digital capital, which you can move anywhere else in an hour. Which of the two do you want? And the answer humbly is, you don't want anything in Africa. And you know what? You don't want anything in South America. And the Chinese don't want anything in China. And if you ask the Europeans, they don't want European property. If you actually look at the demand for euros on a crypto network like digital euros versus digital dollars, it's 99% dollars, 1% euros. Everybody in the world wants to be in the US. They want to be in the most secure system. Everybody wants the most digital. They want the safest. You're wondering, who's buying the Bitcoin? It's people running from everywhere else in the world. Digital capital is immortal capital. Everything you own for a store of value has probably got a useful life of 10 to 100 years, especially after you factor in the maintenance cost, the annual cost to maintain the asset in pristine condition. You can maintain Bitcoin for 10 basis points or less, which means that it's a 1,000-year asset. Okay, name something else that you own in your portfolio that'll be in pristine condition in 1,000 years. Right? We don't think that way. This is a profound breakthrough in thinking about economic wealth. And the last key point here is digital capital is ethical capital. You can take $100 million, put it on a hardware wallet, you've got it. You can put it in your head and memorize it, you own it. People used to joke, like, you own everything else in the world, you own at the pleasure of someone more powerful than you. When they want to take it away from you, they will. Through force, through taxation, through expropriation. There's literally only one thing in the world you can truly own. You can own your memories. If it happens to be the memory of a password or the memory of a private key, you own the money. The pharaohs have been trying to solve this problem for 5,000 years. They didn't solve it. Everybody on earth is trying to solve the problem. How do you take your money with you? Wherever with you means. How do you own it? And here I would say respectfully, literally, Bitcoin is the only thing in the world you can truly own. It's a profound ethical breakthrough in property rights. Happens to be backed by the world's most powerful network. People go, whoa, what's it backed by? It's backed by 20 nuclear reactors worth of electricity that's being modulated through 830 exahash of computer equipment. How much is that? That's all the computer power in the world. That's like enough computer power that if you gathered every other computer and attacked the network, you'd fail. That's how powerful it is. It's also backed by a lot of political power, right? The crypto lobby tilted the last election in the US. People don't like you taking their money from them. Hundreds of millions of people care pretty much passionately about this. It's also backed by economic power. My company's invested $31 billion of real capital to buy 2.25% of the network. There's about $1 trillion of smart money that has been invested in this bank and cyberspace. Real money. By the way, the second best isn't even 1%. right? Probably a quarter of 1% is the most real capital invested in any other crypto network. This is the dominant network. It's also the world's most unstoppable network. It's fault tolerant, it's decentralized. Those ASICs have the power of 500,000 laptops each, little chips. It's like trillions and trillions of laptops defending your money, right? It's, you want to stop it. It's kind of like trying to stop, a swarm of cyber hornets or stop the pneumonia virus from spreading throughout the world. It's just unstoppable. And what I would submit to you is it's the greatest opportunity of the 21st century. My long-term forecast, Bitcoin's been going up 60% a year with 60 vol for the past 8 years. I expect it'll decelerate from 60 ARR to 20 ARR over the next 2 decades. I expect the volatility will decelerate from 60 to 20. I think in 2 decades it'll be comparable to the size of a large equity capital market. I think the law of large numbers says that it starts to converge on the returns of equity. It'll always be 5 or 6% better than the return of the S&P index. And the reason why is you've stripped all the constraints from its use, and you've stripped all the counterparty risk and competitive risk off of the asset. And there's a cost to running a company and being constrained by taxes, competition, counterparty risk, and attack surfaces. All you got to do is watch a large nation state take apart your favorite company, and that's the cost of being a company. That's what you avoid by being a protocol. So what's the world look like? Well, at 29% ARR, which is my base case, Bitcoin becomes a $280 trillion network. It's a $2 trillion network now. It's 100x from here. Why? Because of the law of thermodynamics, because smart people want to keep their money. There's nothing profound here. The real question is, at what rate do smart people find out they get to keep their money? At that rate, the network will grow. Proof? $140 billion have flowed into this network in the past 12 months via the ETFs, and they are spreading virally everywhere on Earth. I list the first 40 here for you. The most successful ETF in the history of Wall Street, that is in 30 years, is the Bitcoin ETF from BlackRock. It is literally the most successful thing Wall Street has seen in your life. The best performing ETFs compared to everything on Wall Street are the Bitcoin ETFs. They're eating everything. IBIT is growing so fast, it's likely within a decade it'll be the biggest ETF in the world. A year ago, there were 6 institutions invested in Bitcoin. There are 3,323 institutional investors now. That's 12 months, just based on 13F filings. There's actually more that are dark money you can't see, but that's a signal for you. The best performing stock in the S&P index in the last 5 years is Strategy, my company. Best performing by a factor of 2.5, crushing NVIDIA by 2.5 times. You didn't hear about it. It's backed by Bitcoin. It's powered by Bitcoin. Now I'll tell you some other interesting facts. The healthiest options market in the S&P index is also Strategy's options market on a market cap basis. The most successful convertible bonds in the last 5 years are convertible bonds issued by my company, backed by Bitcoin. The best performing bonds in the world. We're the biggest issuer of convertible bonds in the world. We're the biggest issuer of equity in the world via the ATM. The number 1 performing preferred stock in the last 5 years is the stock we just launched called Strike. Most liquid, most volatile, highest performing, powered by Bitcoin. What's going on here? I give you a nuclear reactor, I take uranium, I put it in your car, I give you a flying car. Why wouldn't you want it? It's nuclear power. Well, what I'm describing is a crypto reactor powered by fuel, which is Bitcoin. What does it give you? It gives you 60 ARR, 60 vol. What's the alternative? Short-term T-bills, 3 ARR, 3 vol. Okay, what's the difference? Well, one of them is you're barreling through the atmosphere at 60 miles an hour spinning at 60 RPM, and the other is you're standing on flat land watching the world pass you by, right? This is a profound revolution in corporate finance. And the only thing better than Bitcoin is more Bitcoin. Or another way to say it is, how do you actually beat 60% ARR? You actually have to, you go borrow money at 6% interest and invest it at 60%, and you capture the 54% spread. My company borrowed $3 billion a month ago at 0% interest. We bought Bitcoin with it. We're in the market right now issuing a convertible bond, 0 coupon. We will arbitrage it into Bitcoin. A month ago, we issued this preferred. It pays 8% coupon. If you swap 8% for 60% perpetually, you keep the difference. So in fact, the best idea, right, if you want to 10x your money, you just buy Bitcoin. If you want to 100x or 1,000x your money, you buy Bitcoin with somebody else's money, right? And one last point, Bitcoin is the new benchmark. The number of hedge funds that beat the S&P index last year, 4. Everybody else fails to beat the index. The number of hedge funds that beat Bitcoin, 0. Okay? Mere mortals aren't beating it. Why? Because it's pure digital capital. It's pure economic energy with risk stripped away. And you can see here that the Uber driver, right, in Sao Paulo is going to outperform the smartest money manager you know on the Upper East Side, right? And this is a scary and frightening thing, but it's a profound insight. And if you're part of the traditional finance establishment, you'll dismiss it and say, oh, it's just random speculation. What happens when it goes the other direction? But I got to imagine a bunch of normies walk past fire and they said, well, what happens when the fire goes out? Or they walk past the waterfall and said, well, we can't dam that. The water might not keep flowing. And the point really is the water's going to keep flowing and the fire will keep burning if you're an engineer and you figure it out. I don't expect you to agree with what I've said in a few minutes, but I think if you spend 100 hours, you'll come to the conclusion that there are thermodynamic properties, there are physics at work here that are driving this chain reaction. They're not stopping, they're just going to accelerate. So, you want to make a lot of money? Here's the formula. Find something everybody needs, nobody can stop, and very few people understand. That was Apple a decade ago, that was Amazon a few decades ago, that was Microsoft a decade ago, that was Google, that was Meta. That's what Bitcoin is, something you can't stop, everybody needs, nobody understands. That's how you 100x your money. So, carpe Bitcoin.
Carpe Bitcoin. Who here owns Bitcoin? Raise your hands. Anybody not own Bitcoin? Maybe that should be certainly interested in Bitcoin. Well, let me start, and we'll take questions, but I want to actually just focus in on something, Michael, about your own pivot here, because a lot of you said 2.25% of the total, right, that you now own of Bitcoin?
About.
And a lot of that was acquired in recent months. What was the pivot point for you? What was the eureka moment that made you decide, A, I'm going to get more of this stuff, and B, I'm actually going to pivot the business model of my company?
During COVID lockdowns, if you had a $500 million building and your rents were unilaterally ratcheted from $25 million to 0 by a politician forever, would you reevaluate your real estate investment strategy? And what we had was $500 million in capital, and our interest was ratcheted to 0 by the central bank with the message that we're not even thinking about changing interest rates. So somebody declared war on currency and war on bonds, and they demonetized our treasury bills. And at that point, we looked at it and we said, our balance sheet is a non-performing asset, and our P&L is a software company growing 0% against Microsoft, which is a monopoly. And our choice is either a fast death, sell the company, a slow death, linger on while people beat us to death and ridicule us for not being able to get interest on the money and not being able to compete against Microsoft. Or we got to do a strategic acquisition or take a risk. And so in this case, it's just like someone says your building's rent controlled, you're going to make nothing forever, and you're like, I'm selling the building, I'm going to buy something in a different city or something in a different economy that maybe has a future. That's what we did. We traded our cash for Bitcoin. We inadvertently recapitalized the company from an asset that was zero vol, zero ARR to an asset that was growing 60% with 60 vol. And that caused the stock to explode, the options interest to explode. That allowed us to start to raise money quickly. And we raised $10 billion over the next 3.5 or 4 years, bought Bitcoin. And then in November of this last year, we declared that we were going to actually lead the market. We announced our intent to raise $21 billion in equity and $21 billion in fixed income. A week later, there was a red wave. Trump won the election, the Republicans won the Senate and the House, and we flipped from a very anti-crypto, skeptical administration to pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin, and Bitcoin surged up nearly 50%. The equity capital market surged up. We raised $21 billion in the next 8 weeks.
And let's clarify for people, what business are you in? Get to that Peter Drucker type moment. At this point, strategy, formerly MicroStrategy, what in essence is your business model?
We're a Bitcoin treasury company. In essence, we have nearly $50 billion of permanent capital, and what we do is we issue fixed income instruments, bonds, preferred stocks, and then equity, and then our equity is used to support the options market. And we're serving as a bridge between traditional investors that want to trade options or convertible bonds or equity or preferred stock, and they can't own the underlying Bitcoin, or they don't want to own the underlying Bitcoin. And then we're bridging into the crypto economy, and we're buying the Bitcoin and using the performance of the Bitcoin to fuel all of the other instruments. So a financial company, definitely.
And I'm sure I have lots of questions about intrinsic value, obviously volatility. You've seen that. This is an audience of smart people here. You all say, many of you own Bitcoin. I'm going to take questions from the audience. Go ahead. And we have a mic if you want to use it or project. Right.
What can you actually do with Bitcoin, the buy or sell services, without translating back into fiat?
Yeah, you have to convert it back to dollars.
You don't have a medium of exchange.
You're right.
It's not going to be a store of value.
Yeah.
You defined it as speculation.
Okay, so medium of exchange is different than store of value, and the point that I'd make is if I put $450 trillion in front of you and I started melting 3% of it, and then I gave you a switch, an orange switch, and you could hit the switch and stop the melting, is that doing something, right? And so Bitcoin is freeze drying your money, right? It's stopping the entropic decay of your money. And so that the thing that's hard for people to get their hand around is sometimes doing nothing is the most productive thing you can do. If you are out in the cold and north in the Arctic Circle and you're freezing to death, the big idea is walk inside the igloo, right? It's like you're not doing anything, you're just not killing yourself. So what Bitcoin is doing is it's preserving capital, and it's worth trillions of dollars a year to preserve capital, because your alternative is take all your money and invest it in Ukraine. Okay, and my point really is, do you really want to invest all your money and pick a country in Africa and invest it all and watch it melt away? Or better yet, why don't you buy a currency that's collapsing at 10, 20, 30% a year and watch the money melt to zero in 10 years? What Bitcoin is doing is it's providing an escape from the collapse of currencies, the collapse of cultures. Your warehouse is rusting, right? Your house in Pacific Palisades, it burned. You couldn't get insurance, right? So really, the value proposition is you get to keep your money. And that is a value proposition that has never been offered to people with wealth in 100,000 years so elegantly. He would like to ask a question.
Okay, go ahead. Yes, please ask a question.
So, Michael, you used to be a anti-Bitcoin at one time. Actually, spoke against it, and then you say you were converted because of the expropriation of the rentier by not having any yield on your treasury. But what caused you to go anti and then pro in that way? So that's the first question. But the second question is, how can we get rid of this crypto stigma on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think we say Bitcoin's on a need-to-know basis. If you're wealthy and comfortable and feel secure, you just look at it as an oddity or a nuisance. But the way that I actually get you to embrace it is I tell you that the bank where you have all your money just froze your accounts. They've been converted into Venezuelan bolivars, and they're being devalued 99 to 1.
People come to you from a place of pain, basically.
If I steal your money, right, I radicalize you when I rent control your real estate and then I call the loan and you go bankrupt. I radicalize you when the currency that was trading at 400 to the dollar trades at 1600 to the dollar the next day. When you lose faith in your central bank, your local government, in your business, when the mayor expropriates your property, all of the, when the nation goes socialist or communist and they start stealing your assets, and right, this is happening. It happens everywhere in the world. Sometimes they do it because you're the wrong religion. Sometimes you speak the wrong language. Sometimes they just do it to everybody, right, during a communist revolution. As long as you live in a country where you feel safe and you trust the bank and you trust the currency, you know, it's a nuisance. And so when I first encountered it, I didn't need it. I didn't have a mortality type event, and I was busy pursuing other strategies. And when COVID came along, COVID was a war on currency. You know, we had lockdowns of Main Street, but we locked down your money. And when someone tells you that they're just unilaterally going to pay you nothing forever for your assets, it's like if a politician said, we've decided to adjust the prices of your business to zero forever, it makes you angry. And then you think, I have to get out of this town, right? You know, it's going to radicalize you. So I think COVID radicalized a lot of people in the world in a lot of different ways. It definitely accelerated the development of the entire industry. The answer to your second question, well, yeah, crypto had a negative stigma and still does coming out of the crypto winter because it was taken over by a bunch of crypto cowboys who were immature and foolish and took foolish risk, and they crashed their crypto exchanges and they lost everybody's money. But it's pretty clear with the Trump administration that the current administration has embraced crypto as an industry. They have an intention of reviving the entire industry, giving it an ethically sound, legal, digital assets framework and a path to legitimacy for a variety of various assets. We don't have that digital assets framework yet, so we're in between. We're in a transition. But if you roll the clock forward, I think the executive order calls for a digital assets framework to be put on the desk of the president within 6 months. If you roll the clock forward, if we get a good framework by the end of the year, and that season's for a few years, then I think the entire digital assets industry will grow up around technically sound, economically sound, ethically sound principles. There'll be a flourishing of innovation, and the word crypto will be rehabilitated. Right now, we're in between, and we just got to grit our teeth and move through it.
And we'll go to another question. One of the challenges with Mt. Gox and such is that when that money disappeared, there was no recourse, right? And so you're also talking about the need for an infrastructure, you're talking about the Trump administration, that will support crypto better. What would you do if you could wave a wand in Washington right now? What would be your first moves?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing is we need the banks to be green-lighted to custody Bitcoin, to offer loans against it, to handle it, to buy it, to sell it. Because the reason people were trading on FTX or Mt. Gox was because the government didn't allow adult supervision, mature banks, well-run banks to actually provide the service for them. And you know, it's like if I make it illegal for you to get services from a hospital or from a bank, you're dealing with loan sharks, you know, on a street corner, and then there are bad outcomes. So I think normalizing the banking is the number one thing. I think with regard to all these other tokens and the like, there is no clear framework. So there needs to be a clear digital assets framework that lays out the rights, responsibilities, and expectations of issuers, that has transparency. And if that happens, then I actually think you'll have a basis for a growth in the industry that'll be very constructive.
Go ahead, and then I'll go to you next.
Thank you. Michael, you mentioned many attributes of Bitcoin, but one of them is the network itself. And of course, you talked about how much computing power that network has. Now, this can be a very productive thing. Today, there's billions and billions of dollars being invested in NVIDIA GPUs, and the question is, how will you run AI? And data centers are being built all over the world. And yet, Bitcoin's network is fundamentally only doing one thing with ASICs today, which is trying to essentially protect Bitcoin. But this can be generalized in future. Is there any work that you are aware of or that you are pushing within the Bitcoin community to transform the Bitcoin network into a way, for example, to run AI, to run the internet, to run computation more generally?
Well, I think that when people think about Bitcoin, they think of it as a truth network or a trust network, and they achieve it through a combination of public-private key cryptography and proof of work. And the killer application for that, the overwhelming most valuable application, is long-term money, capital. Because that, as I just pointed out, is worth $450 trillion. And that's like more valuable than everything else in the world combined. So there is one thing that is incredibly valuable. There are other applications of the network, like identity, trusted identity, and validation, verification, authentication. And there are lots of interesting projects that work on that. And then there are a lot of layer 2 projects where people are working on creating high-speed payment networks based on Lightning or Spark or the like to move digital dollars at the speed of light. And I think that all of that stuff will advance, and I think that eventually people will find some good applications. But if you want to make billions and billions and billions of dollars right now, if your interest is in the most economically compelling idea, it's go borrow $1 billion at 6%, buy $1 billion of Bitcoin yielding 30 to 60%, keep the difference, right? I mean, that's the big idea. You can do that at scale with one person in a few minutes, right? The other stuff is hard. And by the way, it's hard, and it's only worth 1/10,000th as much money. So yeah, there are a lot of hard technical things you can pursue, but the most efficient thing you can pursue is recapitalize your family, your company, your country, your institution on digital capital.
So a lot of these have led me to this, so it's good. So a couple years ago, when you were doing the first and second Bitcoin for corporations, you were focused on kind of this concept of refining digital capital as part of the strategy. I've been dying to ask you this. It feels like, and I think it's actually a focus point, you've said there's 450 trillion that is not stored this way. That's a big market. I'm going to go grab as much of that as I can for my shareholders and for those. I'm going to evangelize for others to do that, which is, I think, where you've arrived the last 6 months heavy. Does the other piece no longer fit in the strategy, not because it's right or wrong, but just because it's not the thing that you think is your highest and best use? Or where do you sit with that settlement layer, refinement, those hard things that should and could happen once we've adopted this as a reserve? Do you still believe that's important? Is that just not the role you see yourself best suited to play? Where do you sit on that?
I think there are other companies, Apple and Google and Microsoft, and there are tech companies and there are startups that are all very enthusiastic about developing the next device, the next app, the next network, et cetera, and the layer 2s. And there are layer 2s, layer 3s, layer 4s. It's just not our business, right? Our view is there's 450 trillion. If you saw 450 billion people freezing to death, you would say, come in from the cold. So our view is we just think the capital, which is degrading at 3% a year, which means that it has a half-life of, call it 24 years. If you saw everybody on Earth that was going to die in 24 years because they're drinking garbage, toxic water, you would say, why don't you drink clean water so you can live forever, right? And so that's our focus, and I think other companies will pursue lots of other things, but this is such a profound, obvious idea. Replace your dirty money with clean money and live forever, that it deserves to be focused upon.
Well, and I bring that up because I haven't heard a lot of people ask you, and yet a lot of the OGs and a lot of the influencers out there that are, oh my God, Saylor's becoming a risk. And without getting on that, I think it's more about there's a focus in a place where you're attacking the opportunity, and then there's other things for the rest of us to do. Should we not just want to do that?
And you can, we'll take that outside because I want to give a chance for some other people to ask questions. One over there and then over here.
What's the exposure of Bitcoin to quantum? Obviously, there is if nothing is done, there could be an issue. And who's taking the lead to fix that issue?
I think in 10 to 20 years, maybe you'll see a computer that's powerful enough to crack modern cryptography. And if so, that'll be a threat to everything digital and probably most stuff analog in our world. And of course, somewhere between now and then, you'll see the software get upgraded to successfully more powerful encryption algorithms. So, I mean, Bitcoin's no different than, the risk that Microsoft faces or your bank faces. I don't think it's imminent in the next decade. I think that every 2 years there's a lot of quantum FUD, and people post stuff because it's marketing and it drives clicks. But there's no real imminent risk in the next decade. I do think that the world will focus on it, and at some point you'll see these encryption algorithms get upgraded, and everything is embedded in the hardware or the software, and it's going to evolve. I'll make one more point. Bitcoin's a protocol. And the protocol is manifested through a bunch of hardware, ASICs, and through a bunch of software. The idea of the protocol is simple. It's like all the smart people in the world want to keep their money forever without getting cheated. That's the idea. Okay, so 1,000 years from now, it's highly likely that all the smart people in the world will still want to keep their money. And over the 1,000 years, the software will evolve, but the protocol is basically a very simple idea, which is fairly immortal.
We just have probably, 3-4 minutes left, and I just want to right-size one thing. Do you feel other cryptocurrencies are a waste of time?
I don't think our other cryptocurrencies are a waste of time. I think there are use cases in theory for a digital currency or digital tokens, but there's no regulatory clarity that would allow an institution to make $1 billion bet. And you won't really know exactly, you won't know how to economically analyze or legally analyze the outlook for any other idea until the digital assets framework is rolled out and ratified. And at that point, you can have an informed opinion. Right now, the only cryptocurrency in the world where there is global universal consensus as to its legal status and its use case is Bitcoin as a digital commodity, and the use case is long-term store of value. And so if you're saying, what would I bet $1 billion on, or what would I recommend you bet $1 billion on right now? That. And if you said, what's the second best investment idea? I wouldn't recommend any stock. I wouldn't recommend any real estate. I wouldn't recommend anything. And I wouldn't recommend anything else in crypto because I think it's too murky to determine.
All in. Yeah.
Bitcoin's
Except
going to
strategy
13
stock.
million a coin by 2045. Every Bitcoin you sell is going to cost you 13 million bucks. Every Bitcoin you don't buy is going to cost you $13 million. It's not too late.
There you go. Opportunity cost. Anything else? We have about a minute left. Any sort of final thoughts? And of course, I know there's lots of questions in here, and thank you. I think this has been really engaging. Any final thoughts you want to leave?
It's only once in 5,000 years that you create perfect money using technology. This is the first time in 5,000 years. You have the entire world discovering it, and there's hundreds and hundreds of trillions of dollars invested in assets that are imperfect monetary assets. Wealthy people buy apartments in Canada they don't need. People buy buildings they don't need. They buy stuff they don't want. Why do they buy it? Because they have money, and the alternative is let it get debased away by inflation or stolen by someone. So that being the case, you're living through a 20 or 30-year time period where people are going to migrate all of that capital from the 20th century to the 21st century, from analog and physical to digital. You get the chance to benefit from that. It's happening right in front of your face. This is the digital gold rush. In 30 years, if you actually did something about it, your heirs will be wealthy beyond belief. If you didn't, you'll be kicking yourself, thinking, I can't believe I missed that one. It was so obvious.
And if that makes
Thank
you
you.
nervous, you can always just buy a drink at the bar. So thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate it, and lots of food for thought.